so happy we alive.
Still in a jury trial in D.C. So they decided to prosecute her for possession. And the Post covered the government lawyer, some assistant United States attorney, bemoaning the fact that they had to only get a maximum penalty of 180 days in jail for 40 pounds of marijuana. Despite the fact that I've written letters to the editor of the Washington Post that have never been published. Colleagues of mine have written letters to the editor of the Washington Post to try to set the record straight. They just don't get published at all. So what do we do? Any thoughts?
Keep writing letters.
No, I think of persistence, but I mean, and what Alan tells me that Fox, local prohibition propaganda outlet here, is basically working the same beat. That the poor Washington D.C. has this terrible problem with marijuana, and there was a long article in the Post the other day that was along those lines. But it was really funny is that one of the problems is that they were citing that one of the terrible consequences of this was that some of these street dealers have switched from selling crack and heroin to selling marijuana. Excuse me, but in 1986, I wrote an article on how the narcs created crack. Now the next one's going to be how the Washington Post created crack. Because these bastards are lying to the people of Washington, D.C., they're lying to the power establishment in the United States, and they're using this, and this is simply, this is a part of exactly right, this is a part of a consistent propaganda campaign being waged in the nation's capital to get felony laws for possession of marijuana in D.C. Because that also could have been prosecuted under federal law here as well.
One of the things that's been helping tremendously in this campaign letters to the editor, MAP, the Media Awareness Project, and of course DRCnet, fabulous resources, and Dick's website as well, that's now available point and click. The reporters can find out what the actual facts are, but letter writers also have plenty of further information in there. And in the Los Angeles Times, we basically chased the prohibition of the field. There are no more letters in Los Angeles Times in favor of drug prohibition. Every time, whenever it happens, or rare occasions, there will be 6 or 8 or 10 responses. And it all comes from, I recognize many of the names, in fact. It comes from the energy from these internet sites.
And by the way, A. Rosenthal, before he left the Times, is out of my mind column, actually wrote a column complaining that the Times was swamped by letters from druggies. Although that's not what the term is, but basically it's a pro-drug letter writer swamped the Times. The thing, so it does have an impact cumulatively, even in the Post, I think it will.
I'm Steve, but they work for an establishment, and often it's even beyond the editor. It seems to be a lot of consolidation of more and more media into fewer and fewer hands. It's really going to be a challenge. I think that basically the media is not getting it as far as what the Bill of Rights was talking about, Thomas Paine with freedom of the press, and that was a press that truly is adversarial to the government. And rather than getting government officials for quotations, it would be more appropriate if there was any real concern about what the intention of the Bill of Rights giving a free press was, is to hear of people who have been victimized, who've been forced underground due to their own personal preferences and that sort of thing. In fact, my problems with the newspaper make me really feel that what we need in this country probably is a national letters to the editor type of newspaper, because there is no greater credibility in my mind for what most reporters report in a newspaper than what a well-informed letter writer might have to say on a subject. And it's kind of like the idea that they had in China before it was destroyed, was that democracy wall, where people didn't look at the government's newspapers, but they went to the democracy wall to find out the fact what's happening. And perhaps that's what the internet's all about. And I just want to close with one thing. I think there's a difference. I don't know the definition. Maybe you could help me. between being a reporter and being a journalist. But when I think of Gary Webb from the San Jose Mercury, I think of a very fine journalist who got no support from his fellow reporters, and he was demonized by the Washington Post, the LA Times, the New York Times, and I think there's a real disgraceful thing that occurred with regards to Gary Webb. Thank you.
The Washington Post.
And so you're a journalist or a reporter?
I'm not sure I know what the distinction is. I would say that I'm a reporter. Dick's a journalist as well. I don't know, but Dick Cachon has a term called the myth of consensus, which I think that journalists accept that there's really no substantive debate on marijuana policy or drug policy in general. And given this myth of consensus, that it totally fits to form to do the type of journalism you generally see. And the myth of consensus isn't something that's going to be broken really by the people in this room or by legislators and other people, not the journalists themselves.
The consensus, incidentally, I watched one night, I was doing a documentary about a reporter in Los Angeles in Channel 4. And I followed him around through the day as he was working on the story. And then the editing frantically getting ready for the 6 o'clock news. And he barely makes it, and I go into the control room, and all the producers are standing around, everybody's watching it, and they cut to the hosts and the anchors out there on the set, and they open the show and list their top stories, and instantly, as they go on the air, every head in the control room turns to the consoles over here that show the competition. And fortunately for these people, the other 3 channels in LA opened their news show with the same story. And they all breathed a sigh of relief that they had hit, that they had not embarrassed themselves by picking the wrong story to lead with, that they were in sync with ABC and CBS on this. So that's this issue of consensus is an insidious phenomenon. And I think we are cracking through it. I think, once again, I think the internet has a lot to do with that.
One of the things that, by the way, a lot of papers now have the personal email address of the reporters themselves, so that even if you can't get the letter published, if you send it to the reporter that writes it, that is a way of undermining the establishment there, because when the troops know that they're being forced to lie, most of the reporters are honest enough to resent it.
One other point on letter writing, talk radio is a great forum for people's opinions. I did a show the other night, Tom Leykis' show, a syndicated national radio talk show that's on in New York, all over the country, and they had me on for an hour, and they just basically opened up the phones and had people yapping about pot, and it was about 9-1 in favor, and that's a forum, it's a free-for-all, but it's a great forum these days.
I think a lot of the mechanism by which our stories get spiked and changed comes not so much from fear on the part of the press of the government, but of their corporate advertisers. A dramatic example, a classic example, I ran for sheriff in 1994 and had placed some ads in the college paper. Well, after the first one, they sent me a check with my money back. It seems that the McDonald's ad rep had spotted it. And they had an annual contract to buy a half page every issue for the year, and the ad rep said, well, Ben, your $400 just, doesn't carry much weight against the $44,000 McDonald's is going to spend, what it's going to cut from us if we continue to run your ad. So I think a lot of that gets back to what Dick refers to as the difference between promiscuity and prostitution.
Dennis has any comments on the influence of advertisers?
You hear a lot of talk about, advertisers wouldn't like it, or you do something to boost circulation. Never in my 20 years of journalism have I ever once been confronted with a concern, and never have I even been in a newsroom where I've heard it expressed that they really care what the advertiser thinks, except in sort of the most...
Monsanto, LA Times.
Remember, Dennis works for one of the better newspapers in the country.